On June 12, 1972, Holmes Lake in Calabogie, Ontario, was the perfect setting for a peaceful family fishing trip. 5-year-old Adrien mcnaughton, a bright-eyed boy with blonde hair, joined his father Murray, 3 siblings, and a family friend for a quiet afternoon by the water. But by nightfall, their outing would turn into one of Canada's most haunting mysteries. Adrien quickly grew bored of fishing. Frustrated, he handed his tangled fishing rod to his father. It should have been an uneventful moment, but then he was gone. No scream, no splash, no sign of distress. 1 second he was there, the next he had vanished. Confusion turned to panic. Murray assumed Adrien had wandered to the car and sent his eldest son, Lee, to check. But when Lee returned without him, the search began. The once peaceful lake was now a scene of chaos. Family and friends called Adrien's name, scouring the woods for any sign of him, but there was nothing. As darkness fell, fear settled in. Adrien wasn't just lost, he had disappeared. The next day, authorities launched an extensive search. The Ontario Provincial Police, OPP, thousands of volunteers, and even the Canadian forces joined the effort. Over 150 square kilometers of rugged terrain were combed. Helicopters flew overhead, divers explored the lake, and search dogs sniffed through the dense forest. For 12 days, they searched relentlessly, yet not a single clue surfaced. No footprints, no clothing, no evidence he had been there at all. Speculation spread quickly. Some believed Adrien was taken by a wild animal. Others pointed to a suspicious black and white vehicle spotted nearby. Could he have been abducted? Theories of foul play only deepened the mystery. As the search expanded, Adrien's family clung to hope. His mother, Barbara, believed he could have been taken by someone desperate for a child. The thought of him alive, growing up elsewhere, was easier to bear than the alternative. Years passed, but Adrien's story never faded. In 2009, forensic artists created an age-enhanced image showing what he might look like in his 40s. The OPP released it, hoping someone would recognize his face. Was Adrien out there, living a life he didn't remember? In 2016, his case gained new attention through Someone Knows Something, a podcast hosted by Canadian filmmaker David Ridgen. The show re-examined evidence, explored new leads, and reignited public interest. Could modern technology finally solve the mystery? In 2018, investigators returned to Holmes Lake with new tools. A team drilled into the frozen surface, extracting sediment samples. Cadaver dogs, trained to detect human remains, signaled 2 samples, suggesting something or someone could be buried beneath. But the lake held on to its secrets. Poor visibility and thick sediment made further investigation impossible. The findings were intriguing, but not conclusive. Adrien's whereabouts remained unknown. Adrien mcnaughton's disappearance is more than an unsolved case. It's a ghost story that lingers in the minds of all who hear it. His family, his community, and even strangers continue to wonder, what really happened that day? For some, he was simply lost to the wilderness. For others, the case is riddled with sinister possibilities. But one thing is certain, until answers surface, the mystery of Adrien mcnaughton will continue to haunt Holmes Lake and the memories of those who remember the day he vanished. The morning of April 3, 2019, was bitterly cold in Hampton, Maine. Detective Ben Campbell, a respected Maine State Police officer, went about his shift. At just 31 years old, he was known for his dedication and his compassion. He had a young family, a wife, Hillary, and their 6-month-old son, Everett. That morning, as he patrolled Interstate 95, he noticed a vehicle stranded on the side of the road. The driver was in trouble. He pulled over without hesitation, stepping out of his cruiser to help. It was a routine act of kindness, something he had done countless times before. Then, in an instant, everything changed. A logging truck rumbled past. No one saw it coming. No one had time to react. 2 massive wheels suddenly detached from the truck. One rolled harmlessly into the median. The other barreled straight toward Ben. Emergency responders rushed to the scene, fighting to save him, but the injuries were too severe. At Northern Light Eastern Maine Medical Center, the news no one wanted to hear was confirmed. Ben was gone. The shock spread like wildfire. His death was first called a tragic accident, but the truth was more painful. An investigation revealed the wheels had been improperly secured. Negligence had played a role, yet no criminal charges were filed. The inspector responsible was given only a 6-month suspension. At his funeral, thousands gathered. Law enforcement officers from across the U.S. and even Canada stood shoulder to shoulder. The Cross Insurance Arena in Portland, filled with grief, echoed with tributes to a man who had given everything. Colonel John Coate captured the heartbreak. Not stopping would have never entered Ben's mind. He had lived his life with a purpose: to serve, to protect, to help. That instinct, the very thing that made him extraordinary, had led him to that roadside. His wife, Hillary, stood before the crowd, her voice trembling but strong. She spoke of their love, their life together, and the promises they had made. She vowed to raise their son with the same kindness and courage his father had shown. For her, Ben had been a hero long before that day. The pain of his loss did not fade. 2 years later, Maine still honored him. Flags were lowered in his name. His sacrifice became a call to action, a reminder of the dangers officers face and the deadly consequences of negligence. The roads remained treacherous. Trucking accidents, often caused by carelessness and improper maintenance, continued to claim lives. How many could have been prevented? How many more families would have to suffer? Ben Campbell should have gone home that day. He should have held his son, kissed his wife, and laughed with his friends. But fate and failure stole that from him. His story is not just one of loss, but of a lesson, a reminder that responsibility, vigilance, and simple acts of care can mean the difference between life and death. He will never be forgotten, and in his name, the fight for safer roads, for better accountability, and for those who serve continues. What started as a seemingly harmless decoration became the scene of a tragic and baffling incident. In a quiet suburb of Barcelona, a man lost his life in the most unexpected of places, inside the hollow leg of a massive dinosaur statue. The discovery came on an otherwise ordinary afternoon when a father and son happened to glance inside the towering Stegosaurus. What they saw was unsettling. Something was lodged deep within the structure, something that didn't belong. Alarmed, they quickly called for help. Authorities arrived and soon confirmed the unthinkable. There was a body trapped inside the statue. The victim was a 40-year-old man who had been reported missing just hours earlier. His family had been searching for him, unaware that he was in a place so improbable that no one would have thought to look. Investigators pieced together a chilling theory of what might have happened. They suspected that the man had dropped his phone inside the statue and, in an effort to retrieve it, had crawled headfirst into the narrow opening. But once inside, something went terribly wrong. He became stuck, unable to move, unable to call for help. For hours, perhaps even days, he remained trapped, his fate sealed by an unfortunate accident. The dinosaur, which once stood as nothing more than a quirky decoration outside an abandoned cinema, had unwittingly become a tomb. Firefighters worked carefully to free his body, cutting through the statue's structure to extract him, but it was too late. There was nothing that could be done. Police ruled out foul play, stating that there were no signs of violence. This was a tragic accident, a bizarre twist of fate that had left an entire community in shock. No one could comprehend how such an ordinary object could become the setting for such a heartbreaking event. Questions still lingered. How had the man managed to enter the statue in the first place? Why had no one heard his cries for help? And just how long had he been trapped inside before he was found? The autopsy would provide more details, but for now, all that remained was a haunting sense of mystery. As news of the incident spread, the town was left shaken. The once familiar dinosaur, which had stood as a whimsical landmark for years, had now become a grim reminder of life's unpredictability. What had once brought joy and nostalgia now cast a shadow of sorrow. Though officials assured the public that it was a case of misfortune rather than negligence, the tragedy left many wondering how something so simple could have turned into something so tragic. The statue, once a harmless piece of decoration, would never be seen the same way again. As time passed, the story of the man and the dinosaur would become one of those eerie tales that lingered in whispered conversations, a warning of how quickly the ordinary can turn into the unimaginable. It was December 21st, 2013, a cold, crisp winter morning, the kind of day where frost lingers on the grass and the air is sharp with the promise of snow. Simon Hodgson, a 48-year-old man from Rickall, North Yorkshire, pulled on his coat, grabbed his binoculars, and prepared for what should have been an ordinary day. A devoted birdwatcher, Simon had spent years exploring the Yorkshire coast, drawn to its rugged beauty and the thrill of spotting rare avian life. Today, his destination was Bempton Cliffs, a nature reserve near Bridlington that had become his sanctuary over the years. As he drove his camper van toward the reserve, the excitement built within him. The familiar journey brought a sense of comfort, each turn of the road a well-worn path in his routine. When he finally arrived, he parked in his usual spot, overlooking the vast expanse of the sea. The cliffs stood tall and unyielding, their rocky faces adorned with nesting seabirds. The calls of kittiwakes and the distant cry of gulls filled the air, a symphony of the wild that Simon cherished. Stepping out into the brisk air, he inhaled deeply, feeling at peace. The world felt quiet, except for the sounds of nature. He slung his binoculars around his neck and set off along the cliffside paths, eager to lose himself in the tranquility of birdwatching. Hours passed as he observed the graceful flight of birds against the endless sky, jotting down notes in his worn field guide. It was moments like these that made him feel most alive. But as the afternoon waned, Simon knew it was time to head home. He retraced his steps toward his camper van, his heart full, his body pleasantly exhausted. He had seen everything he had hoped to, maybe even more. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting golden hues across the cliffs, and the wind whispered through the sparse grass as if bidding him farewell. Then, Simon vanished. That evening, when his family didn't hear from him, they grew concerned. It was unlike him to go silent, especially after a day spent doing what he loved. They called his phone, no answer. As hours passed, their worry turned into dread. By morning, their worst fears seemed to take shape. Simon's camper van was still in the same spot at the reserve, discovered by an RSPB staff member. The vehicle was untouched. Inside, his birdwatching books and binoculars lay neatly as if waiting for his return. But Simon was nowhere to be found. His family, friends, and local authorities launched an immediate search. Teams combed the cliffs, calling his name, scanning every crevice and path he might have wandered onto. Drones and rescue teams scoured the area, but there was no trace of him, no footprints leading away, no discarded belongings, no clues to follow. It was as if he had simply disappeared into thin air. Theories quickly emerged. Some believed Simon had fallen from the cliffs, his body carried away by the relentless tide. Others suggested he might have chosen to vanish intentionally, seeking solitude and escape from life's pressures. But those who knew him best struggled to believe he would walk away from the life he loved so dearly. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and then years. With no new leads, no sightings, and no remains ever discovered, Simon's case faded into an eerie mystery, leaving his family in agonizing limbo. The absence of answers was a wound that never quite healed. As each December 21st came and went, his loved ones gathered at Bempton Cliffs, standing on the same windswept paths where Simon was last seen. They held vigils, whispered prayers into the salty air, and vowed never to stop searching for the truth. But as they gazed out over the cliffs, an unsettling thought lingered. What if Simon was still out there somewhere, waiting to be found? What if the answers were just beyond their reach, hidden in the depths of the unknown? And what if they would never know what truly happened to the man who vanished without a trace? It was May 26, 2022, a day that should have been just another routine training session at the Los Angeles Police Academy in Elysian Park. This was where officers honed their skills, where recruits learned the ropes, and where experienced cops like 32-year-old Houston Tipping push themselves to be better. Tipping was no rookie. He was a 5-year LAPD veteran, known for his dedication and hard work. He patrolled Devonshire and even served as a bike instructor, always striving to help his fellow officers. But that day, something went terribly wrong. During a grappling exercise, Tipping was paired with another officer. The move seemed simple enough. One officer locked the other in a bear hug before both went to the ground. But when they fell, something snapped. Tipping suffered a catastrophic spinal cord injury, and just like that, his life was slipping away. He was rushed to Los Angeles County USC Medical Center, but the damage was too severe. 3 days later, on May 29th, he was gone. LAPD Chief Michael Moore called it a tragic accident. At the funeral, he spoke of Tipping as a man who went the extra mile to make the world a better place. But behind the condolences and formal statements, something didn't sit right. Not with Tipping's mother, Shirley Huffman, not with the people who knew him, and certainly not with attorney Brad Gage, who believed this wasn't an accident at all, but something far more sinister. According to Gage, Tipping had been investigating a case involving 4 LAPD officers. A serious case. A case that, if exposed, could ruin careers. One of the officers named in the report. He was there that day. He was in the training session. The dots were too clear to ignore. And as more details surfaced, the tragedy of Houston Tipping's death twisted into something darker, something that smelled like a cover-up. The autopsy told a chilling story. Tipping's injuries weren't just from a fall. 3 broken ribs, a lacerated liver, subdural hematomas, and a spinal cord so damaged it sealed his fate. The LAPD claimed a mechanical CPR device had caused the rib fractures, but Gage wasn't buying it. Medical records showed no sign the device had even been used. Even worse, an MRI revealed staples in his head injuries that hadn't been accounted for. If this was just an accident, why did it look so much like a beating? Then came the biggest red flag of all. There was no video footage. The LAPD insisted the training session hadn't been recorded. Convenient. Too convenient. Training sessions were usually documented, yet somehow, this one wasn't. Without footage, there was no way to verify their story, no way to confirm what really happened in that room. And so, the questions mounted. If Tipping was getting close to exposing something, could his death have been a warning, a message? Was this training session a setup designed to intimidate or worse, eliminate a man who knew too much? The LAPD, of course, denied everything. They called it an accident. They promised an internal review. But for Huffman, for Gage, and for those who saw the cracks in the story, that wasn't enough. Houston Tipping was more than a patrol officer, more than a bike instructor, more than just another name on a report. His family and friends spoke of his kindness, his dedication to helping others. Even in death, he gave life, his organs donated to those in need, a final act of selflessness. But his own story, that remains unfinished. Was Officer Houston Tipping the victim of a tragic accident or something far worse? The truth is still out there, waiting to be uncovered. And until it is, one question lingers. What really happened inside that training room? The night had begun like any other, quiet and uneventful. Jane MacDonald, 31, had gone to visit a friend in Airdrie, Lanarkshire, unaware that a tragic accident would soon unfold. While in the kitchen, she slipped, and in a terrible twist of fate, she fell onto a knife that had been left standing upright in the dishwasher. In an instant, an ordinary evening turned into a frantic emergency. The piercing sound of sirens shattered the silence as paramedics rushed to the scene. They worked quickly, doing everything they could before speeding Jane to Monkland's General Hospital. But despite their best efforts, she did not survive. The shocking accident left the neighborhood in disbelief. Strathclyde police confirmed that there was no foul play, just a devastating accident that no one could have foreseen. Officers remained at the scene, their presence a painful reminder of the night's tragedy. The house where the accident occurred belonged to Reverend Sharon Colvin, a Church of Scotland minister. She had yet to speak publicly about the incident, but those who knew her could only imagine the weight of sorrow she carried. Robert Hutton, a former church session clerk, explained that Jane had simply been a guest, caught in an unforeseen and heartbreaking turn of events. Friends and neighbors struggled to process the devastating news, unable to comprehend how such a simple household mishap could have such fatal consequences. The usually quiet cul-de-sac had never witnessed such chaos. Curious neighbors peered through their windows, watching as the flashing emergency lights cast eerie shadows on the pavement. One resident recalled seeing 4 or 5 medics rush into the house, their faces tense with urgency. They did all they could, but the woman they wheeled out in the ambulance never came back. Some onlookers murmured among themselves, wondering if anything could have been done differently to prevent such an accident. Tragically, this was not an isolated incident. 6 years earlier, a 12-year-old boy in Northampton had lost his life in a similar way, a stark reminder of the hidden dangers within everyday household routines. Even the most mundane objects, when left in the wrong position, could turn deadly in a split second. Safety experts stressed that such accidents, while rare, were not unheard of. They urged people to take extra precautions, emphasizing the importance of even the smallest safety measures in the home. Following Jane's untimely death, the Royal Society for the Prevention of Accidents, ROSPA, issued an urgent warning. If possible, always place knives with the blade facing downward in the dishwasher, a spokesperson advised. Even though some manufacturers suggest otherwise, safety should always come first. Experts pointed out that while dishwashers were a standard household appliance, they could still pose risks if not used carefully. A simple adjustment in how utensils were placed could mean the difference between safety and tragedy. It was a minor precaution, something easily overlooked. Yet, one simple oversight had resulted in a heartbreaking loss. Experts urged people to be more mindful, to take even the smallest safety measures seriously, and to remember that even routine tasks could carry unexpected risks. These reminders resonated deeply with many who heard Jane's story, as they reevaluated their own household habits and whether they were unknowingly putting themselves or their loved ones at risk. Jane's family and friends were left in shock and grief. She had been full of life, yet in a single moment everything had changed. Reverend Colvin, who had so kindly opened her home to Jane, now found herself mourning a devastating loss. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park is a breathtaking place, but for one family, it became the setting of an unimaginable nightmare. Just 6 days shy of his 7th birthday, Dennis Lloyd Martin joined his family for a camping trip, an adventure meant to be filled with laughter and exploration. Instead, it became one of the most baffling missing person cases in history, one that remains unsolved more than 50 years later. Dennis, affectionately called Denny by his family, was small for his age but full of energy and resilience. On June 14, 1969, he hiked with his relatives from Russell Field to Spence Field, where they planned to meet up with more family. After lunch, the adults sat back to enjoy the view, while Dennis, his brother Doug, and 2 other boys ran off to play nearby. At some point, the boys huddled together, whispering their plan. The adults, watching from a distance, could tell what was coming: a prank. The boys would scatter and then jump out to surprise them. With a burst of excitement, the kids split up. Doug and the others ran south, while Dennis dashed north, disappearing into the brush. Moments later, the first group leaped out, shrieking with laughter. The adults chuckled, playing along, but then they noticed something. Dennis never emerged. At first, they assumed he was taking his time. His father, Bill Martin, called his name. Then his grandfather joined in. The calls became louder, more urgent. They scoured the nearby woods, expecting to find him crouched behind a tree, giggling at their concern. But there was no sign of Dennis. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, panic set in. Clyde Martin, Dennis's grandfather, set off for Cades Cove to find help, a grueling trek through the rugged terrain. Bill Martin sought assistance from a park naturalist, but nature had its own cruel timing. By nightfall, storm clouds rolled in, winds howled, thunder rumbled, and then came the rain, 3 inches in just a few hours. Trails turned to mud, washing away any trace of Dennis. With only the clothes on his back, no jacket, no hat, he was left alone in the wilderness as temperatures dropped into the 50s. By dawn, the search was in full swing. Park rangers, expert trackers, and volunteers combed the dense forests, calling his name. But the terrain was brutal. Steep slopes, thick brush, and tangled undergrowth slowed every step. Well-meaning volunteers complicated things, trampling potential evidence. Days stretched into weeks. Helicopters searched from above, dogs sniffed the ground, and thousands of man-hours were dedicated to finding the boy. But not a single clue surfaced. Not a footprint, not a scrap of clothing, nothing. By June 25th, Dennis's devastated family returned home. 4 days later, the official search ended. Some refused to give up, continuing on their own, but the results remained the same. Dennis had vanished, as if swallowed by the mountains. What really happened? Some believe he wandered too far and succumbed to the elements. Others think a wild animal took him. But then, there's the most chilling theory. On the day Dennis disappeared, a family miles away reported something disturbing. While hiking near Rowan's Creek, they heard a loud, terrible scream. Moments later, they saw a large, disheveled man moving through the woods, seemingly hiding from view. Could Dennis have been abducted? To this day, no one knows for sure. The Great Smoky Mountains still hold their secrets, and Dennis Martin remains one of the most haunting missing persons cases of all time. The summer heat hung heavy over Washington, D.C. that August day as Officer Wayne David, a 25-year veteran, set out on what would be his final shift. He had dedicated his life to keeping illegal guns off the streets, but in a cruel twist of fate, one would take his own. But this day would be different. It started early that morning, when officers spotted a man acting strangely near a parked car. Something about him didn't sit right. Moments later, he tossed a firearm into a storm drain and took off on a motorcycle, disappearing into the city's streets. Wayne was the best at what he did. Firearm retrieval was his specialty. When his team got word of the discarded gun, there was no hesitation. Wayne would handle it. Then, in a split second, everything changed. A gunshot. The impact was instant. Wayne collapsed. Blood pooled beneath him as his fellow officers rushed to his side. Sirens screamed through the streets as they raced to the hospital. But deep down, they all knew. By the time they arrived, there was nothing the doctors could do. Wayne David, beloved officer, father, fiancé, friend, was gone. The hunt for the man responsible began immediately. Authorities released the name Tyrell Lamont Bailey, 27 years old, dreadlocks, last seen in a white t-shirt and blue shorts. He had abandoned his shoes in his desperate escape, vanishing into the streets, trying to outrun the weight of what had just happened. A $60,000 reward was posted for any information leading to his arrest. The search for Bailey stretched on for a week. Then, suddenly, it was over. He walked into the 7th District Police Station and turned himself in. No dramatic chase, no last-minute escape. Just a man who had run as far as he could, only to realize there was nowhere left to go. He was charged with carrying a pistol without a license, but the weight of Wayne's death hung heavy. Prosecutors reviewed every angle, deciding what came next. More details surfaced. Bailey had a history with guns, offenses dating back to 2017. That day, after tossing the weapon, he had fled so fast he had to abandon his shoes. He had flagged down a stranger on a motorcycle, claiming he had been robbed, convincing the man to take him to Maryland. The rider had no idea who he was helping until he saw the news later. At Wayne's funeral, the weight of his loss was unbearable. D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser and MPD Chief Pamela A. Smith stood among the sea of blue uniforms, paying tribute to a man. The investigation into his death continued. There were questions that haunted those left behind. Could it have been prevented? Had the system failed him? What if the gun had been handled differently? What if it had never been on the streets to begin with? Wayne David's death was more than a tragedy, because Wayne wasn't just another fallen officer. He was a protector, a father, a friend, and the city he loved would never forget him. The night started like any other for a young couple in Tel Aviv, but it ended in a way no one could have imagined. Trapped in an underground elevator as floodwaters surged in, their final moments were spent battling for breath. desperately trying to escape as water filled the small space around them. Dean Shoshani and Stav Harari, both 25, had no idea they were stepping into a death trap when they entered the lift in their apartment building's underground parking garage. Heavy rain had been falling throughout the day, overwhelming the city's drainage systems and causing chaos on the streets. But the true nightmare began when the water found its way into the basement, seeping through an opening and quickly rising. As the elevator descended, an electrical failure suddenly caused the doors to lock. What should have been a quick and routine ride turned into a terrifying prison. Trapped inside, the couple struggled to force the doors open, but they wouldn't budge. Panic set in as the water levels rose around them. Neighbors could hear their desperate cries for help, but no one could get to them in time. Residents of the building immediately sprang into action, frantically calling emergency services. However, their pleas went unanswered for far too long. The city was already overwhelmed with flood-related emergencies, and their calls were either missed or dismissed. One tenant dialed for help repeatedly, only to be met with silence or disconnected calls. Time slipped away, and so did hope. The flooding intensified, and the underground parking garage became a deadly trap. The water had nowhere to go, pouring in rapidly, submerging everything in its path. The air inside the lift grew thinner as the couple fought to stay above the rising water. Their struggle could be heard, the sounds of their distress echoing through the basement. Then, just as suddenly, the noises stopped, silence fell, and with it came the realization that the worst had happened. By the time rescue crews finally arrived, it was too late. More than half an hour had passed, and every second had counted. Emergency personnel had to navigate the flooded parking lot with scuba gear, searching through the murky water for any sign of life. When they finally managed to pull the couple out, paramedics rushed them to the hospital, but the battle had already been lost. Dean and Stav were gone. In the aftermath, grief and anger swept through the community. The tragedy sparked outrage as questions surfaced about the building's infrastructure and the city's handling of the floods. Family members and neighbors pointed to years of poor maintenance, believing that the disaster could have been prevented if the building had better flood protection, if emergency services had responded faster, if the elevator had been designed differently. So many ifs haunted those left behind. Dean's family struggled to comprehend the loss, describing him as someone full of life, always looking beyond the ordinary. Stav, known for her kindness and warmth, left behind a grieving family unable to imagine a future without her. The pain of their absence cut deep, leaving wounds that would never truly heal. For the city, this tragedy became a chilling reminder of how quickly nature's fury could turn everyday places into death traps. It raised serious concerns about safety regulations, building codes, and the readiness of emergency responders. Many feared that if changes weren't made, another disaster like this could happen again. As days passed, tributes poured in, and the weight of what had happened settled over those who had tried to save them. The neighbors who had heard their cries, who had fought against locked doors and useless phone calls, would forever carry the memories of that fateful night. It was a tragedy that left scars not just on the families but on an entire community that had watched helplessly as 2 lives slipped away in the rising floodwaters. 12-year-old Garrett Bardsley was an adventurous boy from Summit County, Utah. With his light brown hair, hazel eyes, and a bright smile, he loved the outdoors. As a dedicated Boy Scout, he spent countless weekends hiking and camping in Utah's wilderness. On August 20th, 2004, Garrett joined his father, Kevin, and fellow scouts for a trip to Kuberant Lake in the Winta Mountains. The area, surrounded by tall trees and clear water, was the perfect spot for an adventure. Garrett was especially excited to fish with his dad, something they both loved. As they stood by the lake, casting their lines, Garrett's clothes became soaked. He laughed it off at first, but soon, the wet fabric grew uncomfortable. Deciding to change, he told his dad he was heading back to camp, a short walk away. Kevin watched as his son walked off, never imagining it would be the last time he saw him. When Kevin returned to camp, Garrett was nowhere to be found. He assumed his son had gotten distracted, But as the minutes passed with no sign of him, worry took hold. He called out, his voice echoing through the trees. Nothing. Kevin searched the area frantically, questioning the other scouts, but no one had seen him. Panic set in. Hoping Garrett had wandered back to the lake, Kevin retraced his steps, but there was no sign of him. The troop quickly launched a search, scouring the area, calling his name. As darkness fell, flashlights flickered through the trees, but still, Garrett was missing. By morning, search teams arrived. Volunteers, professional rescuers, trained dogs, and helicopters covered miles of rugged terrain. Days turned into weeks, yet no trace of Garrett was ever found. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Months passed, but his family refused to give up. They appeared on the Oprah Winfrey Show, their voices trembling as they pleaded for answers. They spoke of Garrett's love for adventure, his dreams of becoming a missionary, and the unimaginable pain of not knowing. Theories swirled. Some believed he was attacked by a wild animal. Others thought he drowned or got lost. Some even whispered he had been abducted. But without evidence, his disappearance remained a haunting mystery. Despite their grief, Kevin and Heidi turned their pain into purpose. They traveled to Ecuador to build a school in Garrett's memory, hoping to create something positive from their tragedy. They spoke at schools and events, urging people to stay vigilant and never stop searching. As years passed, Garrett's face faded from missing posters, but his family never lost hope. They held on to their memories, cherishing the laughter and love he brought into their lives. We can't help but wonder, what if? What if he had stayed by the lake? What if he had never walked back alone? What if his family never had to endure the agony of uncertainty? But for now, those questions remain unanswered. All they can do is hope that one day the truth will finally come to light. It was a quiet Monday morning in November 2024. In East Charlotte, North Carolina, people were starting their day. A team of officers had gathered outside a house on Galway Drive, preparing to serve an arrest warrant on 39-year-old Terry Clark Hughes. Hughes was no ordinary suspect. He was a felon, wanted for illegal firearm possession and fleeing law enforcement. Twice. The officers knew there was risk. The U.S. Marshals Fugitive Task Force was on the scene, a team of highly trained officers from different agencies, including Samuel Pelos and William Elliott from the North Carolina Department of Corrections, Thomas Weeks, a deputy U.S. Marshal, and Joshua A., a respected officer with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. They had done this before. They were trained for moments like this. As the officers approached the house, a deafening crack rang out, then another, then chaos. Hughes wasn't waiting to be arrested. He was armed, waiting, and he had a high-powered rifle. Bullets ripped through the morning air as he fired relentlessly from inside the house, over 100 rounds tearing through the scene in seconds. Pelos and Elliott were the first to fall. They hit the ground hard as their colleagues rushed to save them. But there was no time. Hughes kept firing, and before anyone could regain control, Weeks and Joshua A. were down too. A neighbor, Sing Chan, found himself trapped outside his home in the chaos. He held up his phone, recording, his voice trembling as he pleaded with officers to help him get inside. But there was no time for that, no safe way in. The officers told him to get away, to find cover anywhere he could. The gunfight raged for hours, bullets ripping through the walls of nearby homes, sirens wailing as backup arrived. And then, finally, it ended. Hughes was dead, but so were 4 officers. Joshua A. had served Charlotte for 6 years, dedicating himself to public safety with quiet strength. He was also a first-class sergeant in the North Carolina Army National Guard. His loss hit hardest at home. His wife, Ashley, and their 3-year-old son, Andrew, left behind to navigate a world without him. At his memorial service, held at First Baptist Church in uptown Charlotte, a horse-drawn carriage carried his body through the streets. Hundreds lined the sidewalks, waving flags, saluting, holding back tears. Inside the church, Ashley spoke through grief, sharing memories of the man she loved. Their son, too young to fully understand, waved at a picture of his father, a heartbreaking image that seared into the hearts of those who watched. Samuel Pellos had served 14 years with the North Carolina Department of Adult Correction, working in special operations and intelligence. He left behind a wife and 2 children who would now have to face life without him. William Elliott, another 14-year veteran, was known for his meticulous work and devotion to public safety. His wife and young child survived him, but their world would never be the same. Thomas Weeks had spent 13 years with the U.S. Marshals Service after previously working in Customs and Border Protection. He was a loving husband and a father of 4 children who would never again hear their father's voice. In total, 8 officers had been shot that day. Some survived, but survival didn't mean they were unscathed. CMPD officers Chris T., Michael Giglio, Jack Blowers, and Joshua Campbell made it out, but their wounds, both physical and emotional, would take time to heal. Statesville Police Corporal Casey Hoover, another officer injured in the ambush, was expected to recover, but the scars of this day would never truly fade. The city mourned. The law enforcement community grieved, but beneath the sorrow, questions lingered. How did this happen? Could it have been prevented? Were there warning signs that went unnoticed? One thing was certain. Officers Pellos, Elliott, Weeks, and Joshua A. made the ultimate sacrifice. They ran toward danger when the rest of the world would have run away. Their names would not be forgotten, their stories not erased. They left behind families, colleagues, and a city that would forever bear the weight of that morning in November. Their courage, their dedication, and their final moments would stand as a testament to what it means to serve, no matter the cost. The hayride had started as a night of fun, a simple outing under the cool autumn sky. Families and friends gathered near Nauvoo, Illinois, ready to enjoy a peaceful ride through the countryside. Sitting on hay bales in a double-axle trailer pulled by a John Deere tractor, they had no idea that their evening would take a devastating turn. As the tractor made its way along the gravel path, the driver suddenly lost control. The trailer veered off to the side, tipping dangerously before crashing into a wooded ravine. Panic spread instantly as passengers were thrown from their seats, some landing hard on the rough terrain below. The peaceful night had turned into a scene of chaos. Emergency crews rushed to the area, their sirens breaking through the darkness. Medics worked quickly, assessing injuries and doing their best to help those in need. A total of 17 people were hurt, including 15 children, some as young as 1-year-old. Tragically, a 32-year-old woman lost her life in the accident. Her name was not released, but her absence left a painful void for those who had been with her that night. An investigation into the crash began immediately. Authorities discovered that the tractor was too small to safely pull such a heavy trailer, making it difficult to control, especially on an incline. The driver, identified as Wayne York, was held responsible for failing to adjust his speed to avoid an accident. The soft, rain-soaked ground along the roadside only made things worse, creating a slippery path that made the trailer even harder to manage. For residents of Nauvoo, the accident was a shocking and heartbreaking event. This quiet community was known for its friendly gatherings, especially during the fall season. Every year, families and visitors would come together for the town's Halloween pumpkin walk, a tradition that filled the streets with glowing jack-o'-lanterns and festive decorations. Although this year's event had been canceled, some people still came to celebrate, eager to hold on to a sense of normalcy. In the aftermath of the tragedy, discussions about hayride safety grew louder. Some residents recalled similar accidents in the past, realizing that nighttime hayrides could be more dangerous than they seemed. The peaceful image of a slow-moving tractor pulling a wagon full of passengers often masked the real risks involved. As the town grieved, many began to rethink whether these beloved traditions were as safe as they had once believed. Despite the sorrow, the community came together to support those affected by the accident. Families comforted one another, offering help in any way they could. The memory of that fateful night would not fade quickly, but the lessons it left behind would shape future decisions. Moving forward, safety measures would be a top priority to prevent another tragedy like this from happening again. As the investigation wrapped up and people tried to heal, one thing remained clear. Even the most ordinary, enjoyable activities could sometimes hold unexpected dangers. The tragedy of that night would serve as a lasting reminder to always put safety first, ensuring that future hayrides would be remembered for laughter and joy rather than heartbreak. Nearly half a century ago, what was meant to be a peaceful family hike in northern Stevens County turned into a nightmare. Bobby Panknin, a young boy full of life and curiosity, vanished near Deep Lake Resort, leaving his family trapped in an endless cycle of grief and unanswered questions. It was a simple outing. Bobby, his brothers Jim and Bill, and their mother Edna set off down a rugged logging road. The sound of a nearby creek piqued Bill's curiosity, and Edna, ever the cautious mother, decided to accompany him. She told Jim to stay with Bobby on the road, a seemingly safe decision, but fate had other plans. For reasons unknown, Jim soon followed after them, leaving Bobby alone. It was only for a few minutes, but when Bill and Edna returned, expecting to find both boys waiting, there was only silence. Bobby was gone. At first, they thought he had simply wandered off, but as their calls went unanswered and the minutes stretched unbearably long, fear took hold. They searched desperately, combing the trees, scanning every inch of the road, but Bobby had vanished, as if the forest had swallowed him whole. As hours turned to days and days into weeks, no trace of him was found. The search expanded, drawing in law enforcement, volunteers, and search dogs. The lake was dredged, the woods were scoured, but despite their efforts there were no footprints, no torn clothing, nothing. Bobby had simply disappeared. With no leads, theories swirled. Had he wandered too far and succumbed to the elements? Had he been attacked by a wild animal? Or, the most chilling possibility, had someone taken him? Bobby's father, Howard Panknin, was fishing with his eldest son, Ted, when he heard the news. He rushed back, desperate to find his missing child. But no matter how hard he searched, Bobby remained elusive. As the years passed, grief morphed into guilt. Edna, despite her deep love for her children, became an unfair target for blame. Whispers followed her. Why had she left Bobby alone? The burden of these accusations weighed heavily on her, adding to her heartbreak. Jim, too, carried the weight of regret. He often wondered if he should have stayed. Could he have prevented Bobby's disappearance? But deep down, he knew. None of them could have predicted what happened. It wasn't negligence, it wasn't recklessness, it was simply a cruel twist of fate. Bobby's eldest brother, Ted, often found himself lost in thought, wondering if Bobby was still out there somewhere. He entertained the possibility that his brother had been taken, raised by another family, living under a different name, unaware of the life stolen from him. It was an impossible thought, but one he clung to because the alternative was too devastating to accept. Though the Panknin family never stopped loving the outdoors, they never returned to Deep Lake. The place that once held laughter and togetherness now carried the weight of an unbearable loss. Still, Bobby's memory remained with them, woven into every story, every photograph, and every whispered wish for a different ending. To this day, Bobby's disappearance remains one of Washington's most haunting, unsolved mysteries. No body, no evidence, no closure. Just a young boy who stepped into the woods and was never seen again. It was a sunny day of September 2024 in Queensland, Australia. It was a day for the annual wall-to-wall ride for remembrance, a solemn yet powerful event where officers from across the country rode in honor of their fallen comrades. Among them was Senior Sergeant Brendan Wiblin, a man who had dedicated 28 years of his life to the Queensland Police Service. The journey had begun in Brisbane, hundreds of riders forming a long procession of flashing badges, all united in one purpose: to remember. Brendan was among them. The final destination was Canberra, where they would stand together on National Police Remembrance Day, paying tribute to those who had made the ultimate sacrifice. But Brendan would never make it to Canberra. At around 3:20 p.m., as the riders made their way near Glen Innes, New South Wales, something went wrong. Brendan moved to overtake another rider, but in a sudden, he lost control. His motorcycle veered off the road. the tires skidding helplessly against the asphalt before the bike plunged down an embankment. Fellow riders slammed on their brakes, rushing to his side. Bystanders ran forward. CPR was performed desperately as they willed him to hold on, but the injuries were too severe. By the time paramedics arrived, there was nothing more that could be done. Brendan was gone. The news spread like wildfire, sending a wave of grief through the Queensland Police Service and beyond. This was a ride meant to honor the fallen, but now, in the cruelest twist, it had claimed another life. Assistant Commissioner Brian Swan struggled to find the words, echoing the heartbreak felt by Brendan's colleagues and friends. He spoke of the loss, the shock, the way the entire police family now stood united in grief. Queensland Police Commissioner Steve Golchowski called it devastating. Brendan had died in an event meant to honor those lost before him. How could they make sense of that? For those who had worked with him on the Gold Coast, it was unfathomable. He wasn't just a colleague. He was the one who always had their backs, the one who brought sharp wit and unwavering dedication to every shift. The pain reached beyond the police force. The riders who had shared the road with him year after year were left reeling. Brendan had been there to remember his fallen friend, and now they would have to remember him. Shane Pryor, president of the Queensland Police Union, spoke of Brendan's loyalty, his integrity, the way he had always been the first to step up for others. He wasn't just riding to honor the fallen, he was one of them now. Despite the overwhelming grief, the ride continued. It had to. Brendan's family made sure of it. His son, Liam, who had ridden beside him in past years, was shattered but resolute. His father would have wanted them to keep going, to finish the journey in his name. As the riders reached Armadale, they paused, heads bowed, joined by New South Wales police officers in solemn tribute. But the journey wasn't over. They pressed on toward Canberra, carrying Brendan's spirit with them. Tributes poured in from every direction. Bianca Stone, a Gold Coast political candidate, shared her heartbreak, calling Brendan a great man. As the days passed, the grief didn't fade, but the support never wavered. The riders completed their journey. They arrived in Canberra, standing shoulder to shoulder on National Police Remembrance Day, knowing they had lost one of their own along the way. The airport was alive with movement, a place where thousands passed through every day, their thoughts filled with the excitement of travel or the anticipation of returning home. Among the crowd were two young boys, drawn to the large monitors that displayed flight information. The screens, housed in a towering sign, flickered with numbers and destinations, an ordinary fixture in the bustling terminal. But what seemed like a harmless moment of curiosity would soon unravel into an unimaginable tragedy. A Transportation Security Administration officer had noticed the children moments before disaster struck. They were gripping the edges of the monitors, their small feet balanced on a metal bar that ran along the bottom of the structure. The sign stood tall and solid. At least, that was what everyone believed. Yet, beneath its sturdy appearance, danger lurked unnoticed. Time moved forward with an eerie inevitability. As the officer passed by, he considered intervening, warning them of the risks, but hesitated, expecting an adult nearby to step in. The boys continued to hold on, unaware of the unseen forces at play, the shifting balance, the mounting tension that would soon break. Then, in a sudden, gut-wrenching moment, the airport was rocked by a deafening crash. A metallic boom echoed through the terminal, shaking the floor as if an unseen force had struck from above. Travelers froze in place, their thoughts shifting from mundane concerns to an overwhelming sense of dread. The towering sign had fallen, trapping the children and their mother beneath its crushing weight. Screams filled the air, piercing through the terminal's usual hum. The TSA officer, who had only just stepped away, felt the impact reverberate through his feet. For a split second, he wondered if an explosion had gone off, but the sight before him told a different, horrifying story. Others rushed toward the fallen sign, struggling to lift it, their hands grasping at the heavy structure that had transformed from an ordinary fixture into an unyielding force of destruction. Amidst the chaos, Emergency responders surged forward, their training kicking in as they assessed the scene. A woman lay injured, her body pinned beneath the wreckage, her cries of agony merging with the panicked voices around her. Beside her, two of her sons, once playful and full of life, were now trapped beneath the collapsed structure. The weight of the fallen sign had crushed their small frames, leaving onlookers frozen in helpless horror. A security officer at a nearby checkpoint watched the scene unfold through tear-filled eyes. A passenger he had been assisting moments before now stood trembling, her face streaked with tears. When he asked what had happened, her voice was barely more than a whisper as she recounted the horror she had just witnessed. The realization hit him with a cold, sinking finality. This was no ordinary accident. This was a moment that would leave scars, both visible and unseen, on all who had been present. Medical teams worked feverishly, their hands moving with practiced precision. They fought against time, against injury, against fate itself, but fate had already made its decision. One of the boys, Luke Brissett, did not survive. His mother and brothers, though still breathing, bore the physical and emotional wounds of a nightmarish moment that could never be undone. In the days that followed, the incident sent ripples through the airport community. The once overlooked sign, standing silent and unthreatening for years, had transformed into a symbol of tragedy. Investigators combed through the wreckage, searching for answers. How could something so routine, so unremarkable, turn deadly in an instant? Reports soon revealed the grim truth. The structure had not been secure, its weight far greater than its supports could handle. It had been a disaster waiting to happen, unnoticed by all until it was too late. The tragedy left behind more than just sorrow. It raised urgent questions about safety, about responsibility, about the hidden dangers lurking in everyday spaces. Conversations about structural integrity and airport safety took center stage, but for one grieving family, no amount of discussion could bring back what had been lost. Airports are places of movement, of beginnings and reunions, of goodbyes and new journeys. But on that day, in that moment, it became a place of heartbreak. The echoes of that crash, the weight of that moment, would never fully fade. And as travelers continued to pass through the terminal, glancing absent-mindedly at the screens above, few would ever know the tragic story hidden in the shadows of an otherwise ordinary place.